Welcome to Let's Talk Death, conversations to inform and inspire. Let's Talk Death is a series of conversations with some amazing people from various fields. Our goal through these conversations is to normalize, educate, and demystify the taboo around death, dying, and the journey of grief. Hello, welcome to this episode of Let's Talk Death. I'm Fran Solomon.
And I'm Andy McNeil.
And we are thrilled to be your host for these conversations. Let's Talk Death is brought to you by Heal Grief, a social support network creating community after someone has died. Everything we do is inspired by our core belief that no one should ever grieve alone.
Our goal with this program is to have a friendly chat with some amazing people so we can help normalize and educate our Heal Grief community. Our guest today is Grace Rector. Grace is a graduate of Georgetown University and hopes to work in the field of education and facilitation. Grace believes that dialogue is key to relationships and work. She created a dialogue series at the Beeck Center for Social Impact and Innovation to highlight vulnerability as a strength in the workplace, not a weakness. A motherless daughter since the week before her 21st birthday, Grace found writing to be a coping mechanism for her grief. At 22 years old, Grace published the Rector Girls with the hope of memorializing her mother and honoring her legacy. Her book is about the lifelong lessons and intimate bond between mother and daughter. Honest, heartfelt, and heartbreaking, Grace lets us into her world and her most vulnerable moments, inspiring readers to live their life with fullness and gratitude. Grace, we are delighted to have you as a guest on our show.
Thank you so much for having me. It's great to see you both.
So Grace, what was it that inspired you to write the Rector Girls?
It was never really part of the plan. It was not part of the plan to lose my mother either, but my mom actually taught me to journal since I was a kid to get my emotions out in an intimate space. And so losing her, I turned to journaling to write down certain moments that I missed with her. I think I had this kind of internal fear that I'd forget these memories, and whether or not I would, I just felt like I needed to write them down. And then I was actually approached by a professor at Georgetown who taught a course on writing your own book and writing your first book. And so I decided to join that class, not really knowing what it would look like. But it wasn't really the goal to become a published author, to say I've written a book. It was more that my mom led such an incredible and unique life. And I thought that the most effective way of writing a book would, like you were saying, Andy, was to write down those lessons that she taught me throughout my life. Because I that's my life. That's what I'm used to. But I've had so many people tell me throughout my life, you and your mom are so unique. Like, I'm a sperm donor baby, and many people have not encountered that. Or my mom just never gave up, and whatever issue she ran into, she found a way to get what she wanted and to make life work for her. And so rather than making it all about me, I think it was a way to honor her memory and to just thank the community that got me to where I am, and also to thank my mom's community that helped support her in raising a daughter on her own. She always said that I never actually raised her alone because she had her whole community or tribe behind her. And I think this is just a great way for me to honor her memory, and also for those who are close to my mom and me to celebrate her life with us.
It's interesting hearing you talk. I know that the subject matter of your book will relate to a lot of people because they have their story, right, of their person, and understand that relationship. One of the things that has been striking to me over the years, just working with people after someone dies, is how much we are the sum of all of the relationships we've had in our life. Right. And so you think about those most impactful relationships, and in many ways, we wouldn't even be who we are if we had not been in relationship with that person. At the same time, we wouldn't be who we are if we weren't grieving that person in the relationship too. So somehow that it's all intertwined together. And it seems like that your book captures a little bit of all of those things.
Definitely. I think relationships is honestly the most important part of the book, and it's been the most important part of my grief journey. And tying that into the pandemic, I lost my mom on Valentine's Day of 2020, and a world pandemic began a month later. And I'm a very social person, so being around people is what makes me feel better. And so to be grieving not only my only family member, but also to be grieving alone, is really difficult. I mean, I got a lot of support from friends and family via Facebook or via text or, letters and things. But I think, like you're saying, it really is all about relationships and community. And I think one of the most healing ways, at least for me in my grief journey, is to talk about the person that died, with other people who cared about them. And while I could do that on the phone, there's something beautiful about just like, I've literally, this couch, I've had people come over and sit with me and cry about it. But like, there's something beautiful about just putting your arm around someone and being together. And I think this new virtual world, while it has its advantages, I think is really hard to create those lasting emotional connections, because it feels a bit forced sometimes, or it feels inauthentic, or you can't reach out and touch someone to comfort them, right? You can just be there. So I think this pandemic and this virtualness of the world has definitely added a different dynamic to the way that people are either grieving recent losses or losses from a long time ago that they might be having to re-deal with because we're spending so much time by ourselves.
Yeah. Grace, I want to ask you, you're still quite young in your journey with your grief. How challenging was it, or was it cathartic to write this book? I mean, how difficult must that have been? Can you tell us about that experience?
I've gotten that question a lot. And people have told me that they cried a lot during the book. And I said, that's understandable, because I was crying writing the entire thing. So I'd be concerned if you weren't crying a bit. But I think a specific moment that felt very me, that felt very my mom when I was writing was, I honestly probably wrote this book over 5 days, but like 10 hours a day. Like that was how my writing process worked. I was like, I'm committing this day to writing and grieving and being in my feelings, because that's really emotionally draining to tap into and out of. So I was like, this is my day to just be sad, or to remember her. And I remember I got to a point in the book midway where her death was upcoming, and I just was struggling with that because I couldn't pick a time or place that seemed right or welcoming to write that scene. And so I kept putting it off and putting it off, and my editor was like, we need the rest of the book. And then I was visiting a friend at the time in New York. I was flying, and I got on this plane during the pandemic, wearing my mask, and I was like, maybe I should just write it right now. Like, I have 5 hours. Why not, right? What, just try it, see what happens. And of course, I take out my computer. I'm just writing. Obviously, it's the saddest thing in the entire book because it's the most emotional for me to think about. And I have my mask on, and I'm just sobbing and furiously typing and just, crying into a mask is not a good situation. And the guy next to me is like, are you okay, lady? And I'm like, no, but I got to get this done. So, I think it was very cathartic. It came out in different ways. I don't think I knew what the book would be for me, but even just, who would have thought that editing a book or going back and looking at it would be emotionally healing, but it was. And talking about it with friends was. And I think another healing part about it is, after writing it, people saying, I didn't know that about you, or I really admire that, or tell me more about your community, or I'm looking to find that kind of community that is built on unconditional love. So writing it was difficult, but I think the most rewarding part of it was the conversations that have happened afterwards about what people reading it have reflected on and acknowledged about their own life.
And you recently had a book club that you shared offline with me.
Yeah, I did. I spoke to a book club 2 nights
A
ago.
book club, a book signing. I'm sorry, a book
I
signing.
did have a book signing too. I'll tell you about both, but the book signing last week, there were about 100 people gathered in my mom's backyard, and the emotions were just, it was so beautiful, to have my first grade teacher next to a teacher my mom worked with in the Lennox School District, and my mom's boss from a different university, or her best friend or her best friend's kid, and having all of them together in one space was, it's so hard to describe, but it was like, if this book has been able to bring those people together to tell stories about my mom, I think that's a success. I mean, even this podcast, Let's Talk Death, I think it's something that people don't do as often. So to have that space designated for remembering someone's person and the impact that they left is really powerful. And also 2 nights ago, I spoke at a book club. I knew one of the members, but the rest had never met me or my mom. And it was actually fantastic because these people had never met us. And what was beautiful was they were all parents, and their takeaway from the book was, I wonder how my kids will remember me. I wonder what lessons I'm imparting on my child. And I wonder, what kind of community I've left behind. And so I think something special about the book too is it really is relatable to people my age, dealing with college and personal life. And it's also relatable to anyone that's either starting a family, has created a family. I think it's really accessible for different age groups because there's something relatable to every place that you're at.
What's interesting with grief itself, it is, relationships are important. And it certainly is, it can be about the relationship we have with the person who died, and even the ongoing relationship we have with them, after they die, that sense of connectedness that we might still have. But another piece that we don't often talk about with grief is that grief is also about that relationship we have with ourselves. And it seems to me, at least I'll say, anytime I've done any sort of writing around things that are personal, it's almost like I have this dialogue with myself. It's kind of like it's a little bit of reflection of that inner relationship we have with our grief, and which is really with ourselves in a lot of ways, because grief is, I know it's sort of existential, but grief really is an individual process in a lot of ways. Not that it can't be about community, but it's that very personal, subtle thing. And I think people they have that internal dialogue that they struggle with. How do I articulate that? How do I put that dialogue on paper, or how do I verbalize it? And I think that's where the challenge can come sometimes.
Yeah, absolutely. Journaling has been great for me, but definitely when my brother told me that the book read like a journal, I was a little nervous. I was like, was I too, emotionally tell all? Like when I was reading the final draft, I had to do 2 read throughs. And the first time I was like, oh, this isn't bad. It's kind of good. And then the second time I was like, oh crap, like people are actually going to read this. Like, do I want everyone to know this much about my inner psyche? Um, but I think there's something powerful about, telling people where you're at, because I think, at least to going to Georgetown or being in different communities where there's a high stress culture of, I'm doing fine. I'm fine. I'm doing all these things and I'm okay. Like I feel great. But to show that you can still appear happy and good, but also be struggling with those things below the surface. And I'm grateful to Heal Grief for providing the space to participate in the young adult therapy groups or discussion groups, because it's really helpful to talk to people my own age about these things, because I think grief, especially, at age 22, makes me feel 10 years older. And so to be able to connect with people my own age about those issues makes me feel not alone. And it makes me feel like I can talk to young people as opposed to 40-year-olds that have had losses. But I feel like in my life, those are the people that I resonate most with because they've gone through that. But to have the space to connect with people that understand what it's like to be young but feel old, and to feel youthful and energetic but also feel tired and overwhelmed is really powerful to have. Yeah.
Yeah. So
Well, by
let's,
making yourself vulnerable, and saying, putting in writing those things that you went back and went, oh crap, maybe I don't want people to know this. But those are the things that quite often speak truth to someone else's experience because they've been holding it going. People would, they, what are they going to think if they know this? And then they read you saying it, and it just, it normalizes and it helps, maybe help, because those types of things do make us vulnerable. They make us vulnerable to other people. Now you know something that
Yeah.
you didn't know about me, right? But what we find is 9 out of 10 of everyone else, they're experiencing or thinking the same thing. They're just afraid to say it.
so let's pretend for a moment. Another book, a follow-up. What is it going to say?
Ooh, if there were a second book, what would it say? I think, I mean, my first reaction is I really don't want a preachy book, because I think I don't like being told what to do, and I don't want to pretend that I have all that wisdom. So I think the most powerful thing to do is share my story and have people take away from it what they will, as opposed to me telling them how to feel or what to do to feel better, because grief specifically is very, like you said, Andy, a self-driven process. And if I were to write a second one, I think grief is still going to be part of my story. I think it's not going to be as large of a focus, but genuinely, this isn't grief related, but I've kept a note on my phone of positive encounters with strangers, because as a kid my mom would always tell me, talk to strangers, and you're like, what? Most parents say don't talk to strangers, stranger danger, right? But my mom would always say, no, talk to strangers, they have something to teach you, like always. And it's worked out for me thus far. So I think I would write a book about why to trust strangers and how to open yourself up to people and how to be more vulnerable and open, like you're saying, Andy, about the importance of being vulnerable so other people can connect in. But my mom taught me to see the world as a place that's, rather than out to get you, but a place that's wanting to teach you and wanting to bring you in and call you in and to find those that need the most love. That was one of the chapters I wrote, because a friend of my mom said that she brings love to the places that haven't seen love. And he also said, Father Greg Boyle said, your mom is a force of nature in the shape of God's heart. And I think she was such an incredible lady that it's hard for me to isolate what I got from her and what's me. But I think I'd love to build upon those lessons and specifically focus on the ways that we can connect with those that aren't part of our community. I focus on who my community is in this book, but it might be interesting to talk about how to bring people into your community or how to connect with people that aren't, don't belong somewhere, just to spread love, because I think especially this last year has been really tough for those that don't have the resources to be in their home, or essential workers that are dealing with all that. So that's my initial reaction, but we'll see.
What a
It would
beautiful
be,
way to continue the
yeah,
legacy your mother
yeah.
bestowed in you.
It would be an interesting read to read about random encounters with people. Just even that, just what that would tell us about the world around us. So, well, Grace, we're close to the end of our time together. It always goes by very fast. But those who watch the episodes often want to know how they can connect with our guests. How might people do that if they want to connect with you or with your book or
Yeah,
work?
absolutely. So I post pretty regularly on an Instagram account for the book. It's at the _ rector _ girls. So at the Rector Girls, but with an underscore in between each word. I also have a website, Grace Mariana Rector. Mariana is Mariana. And the last thing I would offer is, if you want to buy the book, it is on Amazon, and you can just type in bit.ly/the Rector Girls, all together, capitalized T, R, and G in the Rector Girls. But I think right now for me, it's just about connecting with people and hearing their stories. I've been able to attend like motherless daughter events, and I just am really always excited excited and grateful to hear people's stories about their journeys. And I think everyone that's lost someone important to them has those lessons that they've learned from their person. And I think this book is more about storytelling than it is anything else. And so I'd love to, I just based on the book club that I did last time, something that I'm trying to do about talking to this book is talking to people and saying, what lesson is the most important for you to be left as your legacy? What do you want your kids or your family to remember a lesson from you by? So that's kind of the goal of the book.
Amazing. And make sure I have all those links, because we'll put them on our website and in the description on the video. Grace, we want to thank you so much for being a guest here on Let's Talk Death and sharing the inspiration behind your book and your journey.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really great to be here.
Thank you. And thank you to those joining us for this episode of Let's Talk Death. If you would like to learn more about Heal Grief, please visit us at healgrief.org. At healgrief.org, you can learn more about all of the programs and resources of Heal Grief, including our national network of support for grieving young adults called Actively Moving Forward.
And if you know of a bereaved adult, refer them to the AMF app, where adults of all ages connect with others experiencing a similar death loss. And last, make sure to sign up on healgrief.org to receive our newsletter for links to future episodes of Let's Talk Death.
And so again, with that, thank you for joining us, and we will see you next time on Let's Talk Death.